Hello, everybody. My name is Mirko Novakovic. I am co-founder and CEO of Zero, and welcome to Code Red. Code, because we are talking about code, and red stands for requests, errors, and duration, the core metrics of observability. On this podcast, you will hear from leaders around our industry about what they are building, what's next in observability, and what you can do today to avoid your next outage. Hi, everyone. Today, my guest is Hannes Lenke. Hannes is the CEO and co-founder of Checkly, a code-first synthetic monitoring tool. He previously founded TestObject and has worked in testing and observability field for 15 years. I'm glad to have him on board today. Hannes, welcome to Code Red.
Thanks, Mirko. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, that's great. Two Germans talking on a podcast in English. That will be fun.
Yep, totally.
We always start the conversation with the first question, that is, what is your Code Red moment?
Yeah, I mean, the Code Red moment, that's a good question, right? So it kind of goes back to where I'm coming from, right? So you already introduced me as working in testing and observability since a while. It's almost 2 decades now, right? So, and, when I founded my first business, TestObject, sold that later on to Source Labs. I was general manager of Source Labs, worked with lots of customers doing test automation on production, right? So what did we do at Source Labs? We enabled customers to, scale their test automation in the end, right? So and this was meant for pre-production testing. Though we have seen lots of customers using Source Labs for production testing. Why was that so? I mean, back then and still, staging environments are complex, right? So it's quite complex to spin up a staging environment, which is production-like. If you do end-to-end testing, it might be easier, to do them on production, even though, the system is already rolled out. Another reason was, even for larger enterprises like banks, insurances, etc., the staging environments were often not the most performing environments, right? So it was kind of hard to run, hundreds of tests against, this staging server, right? Because it was just not able to handle all these requests. So, in the end, development teams and the QA teams back then decided, okay, let's run some of these tests, against the production environment, really to make sure that, our app performs well, right? So I've seen that happening quite a lot. And this kept me thinking, it's not only about testing, it's about automation, right? So you want, as an engineer, you might want to understand you should understand how your app does, right? And is it reliable? Is it performing, right? Is it reliable even before it's rolled out to production? And, is it reliable later on, right? While it's on production, you might want to reuse the automation, the tests that you have already implemented for testing, and then later on for production monitoring, right? Run these tests on a sequence, right? And really, understand if your app works from a user perspective. And I've seen that happening, for companies like Salesforce. And this was my moment to think about, okay, I mean, there needs to be a tool which is optimized, for production monitoring, which takes your existing end-to-end tests and, use these for production monitoring.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know if I remember correctly, but I think Source Labs was basically JMeter automation in the cloud, right? They used JMeter scripts.
No, it was Selenium automation in the cloud.
Oh,
right?
Selenium. So it was Selenium. Yeah.
Not JMeter, but, they're still, they're running and they're doing, lots of other frameworks, etc. But, it was started with Selenium automation in the cloud.
Yeah,
right?
Selenium, I remember, also very good. It's basically, you used it as a developer in the early days to automate your tests, right? And script it in the browser as a plugin and then record it, and then you play it back, right, to see if this thing still worked that you thought they should work, right? I have to say, we were proud users of Checkly at Instana. Then I became an angel investor in Checkly because I'm a big fan, and with Zero, we are again a customer of Checkly. We use you for our synthetic checks. Maybe you can describe a little bit what Checkly does
and you are not using Selenium, you are using something called Playwright, right? Maybe you can also describe a little bit what that is and what you're doing, and then later on we can talk about your latest, I would say, evolution of the product towards tracing and how you integrate with tracing. But I think the synthetic part is what we should start with, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, right? So what Shakti does in its core, in the end, it enables you to understand how is my, API, how's my service, how's my web app doing from an end user perspective, right? So we allow our customers, which are, might be DevOps engineers, might be SREs, might be developers, to run their automated test script as tests, and then for production monitoring continuously, from 21 data centers worldwide, right? So that's the core, right? So we're testing your application from an end user perspective. That's what synthetic monitoring does, right? So it's pinging your APIs. It's going through transactions on your website, in your web app, etc. And if something goes wrong, then we alert you. We surface that something is wrong from an end user perspective. So that's on a high level what we do, right? And as you said, we're using a framework which is called Playwright. So it's not Selenium anymore, right? So, but Playwright is the latest automation framework. It's adopted by thousands of organizations worldwide, developed by Microsoft actually, right? And this is an open source framework. Developers already know how it should work, how that automation framework might work. So they can use their existing knowledge to write end-to-end tests in the end, and use these end-to-end tests for production monitoring as well.
I remember with Selenium, you had basically two modes. One was you either program it was a scripting language, but the other way was you basically used your browser and you did what you wanted to test in the browser. It actually recorded it, and then you had the script at the end. You could change it, but it was basically two modes, right? One was a very easy, I record something and then get a script, and the other was I program it. So is Playwright similar?
Playwright supports these two modes as well, right? So Playwright has a tool called Playwright Code Gen, which you can use to record the first actions, and then it spits out code, right, which you can then later on use and execute, right? And I mean, the truth is, with Playwright Code Gen, you can get started quickly, right? So you can maybe start to create a first script, but then as a user, you might want to do some adjustments, etc., to make it really fast, reliable, etc. So it's more, a kickstart for you as a developer. And then, in the end, it's something, it's a code in your IDE, which you would, maintain there.
And is it TypeScript or what is it?
Yeah, it supports TypeScript and JavaScript. It also supports Python and various other languages. But, for Shakti, we support TypeScript and JavaScript.
Okay.
And Playwright, is known for browser automation, but it can also help you to automate APIs, right, in a similar fashion. And we're using that as well and executing these scripts, in a similar fashion.
And then I think, just for me to understand, right, when I use Selenium, so I have to be very honest here, right? The last time I coded was 2009, right? So, and at that time, the Selenium was the cool shit, right? And so I use Selenium, but I mainly used it for testing my code if it works as expected, right? So I used it in my CI/CD environment. So at that time, it was called Hudson. Later, I think it turned into Jenkins. So I had my Jenkins server, and I executed I had my unit test, but I also had my Selenium test to basically make sure, okay, what I develop is still working as I expect. So they were running inside of the CI/CD cycle. But at that time, I never used it. I tried to remember, but I never used it for uptime monitoring, right? So there is a difference between testing your code in a CI/CD environment and testing your code or testing your application during production to see if it's still up, right? And as you said, do it from 21 data center, but it could be that if I'm in Spain, it works, but because there is a DNS problem in whatever, India, I can't access the page anymore, or the cable between the Atlantic is broken, so I can't access the page anymore from the US because my data center is in Europe, right? So that's kind of uptime monitoring. And that's what you do, right, at Checkly? Or do you do both? Are you a CI/CD tool or?
I mean, we're not a plain CI/CD tool, right? So, but we allow our customers to pretty much, execute these scripts also on demand, right? So also for testing. So you can use us for CI/CD cases. And the truth is, lots of our customers are doing that, right? So they're writing these test scripts and using them once, in their CI/CD environment, and then later on a schedule for uptime monitoring, right? So maybe, if you use us in a CI/CD environment, want to make sure that your app works from a functional perspective, right? More than catching issues, in various places around the world, right? So, but then if you schedule checks for monitoring, you might want to make sure that your application is reachable from Germany, from the US, East Coast, West Coast, etc., right? And that we capture that as well. But, the lines are kind of blurry from my point of view, right? So for me, it's automation, right? And what we've seen throughout the last years is, the lines between, operations and developers kind of, became much more blurry, and, the teams are not so siloed anymore. So, and what a tool like Checkly enables you as someone who's, sitting in a cross-functional development team, DevOps team or SIE team is, work together with the engineers who are traditionally created these automation tests, and then, use these tests for production monitoring, or you use a subset of these tests for production monitoring, right? So, but all of a sudden you're speaking the same language with, language that your developers are, speaking today, right? So you're using the same programming language, etc. And that's what we enable our customers to do.
And how do you help me? Sorry, but this is my old developer thing coming up, because I'm always thinking, okay, if I do tests in my CI/CD staging environment, I can see me doing use cases and changing data, etc. I have my test users, but now I'm doing this in production. So are you helping me somehow with the data? So which users and passwords I can use to log in, and then if I do changes, I kind of have to roll them back, or how do I manage to not mess up the data in production? Or is it a problem I have to solve because that's something you can help me with?
Yeah, it's an interesting problem, right? So we help you, with parts of it, because we have set up tear down scripts, etc. So you can make changes to your database before such a script is running, and maybe tear down that script later on, etc. So we help you with that. But in the end, you need to come up with a concept, how to monitor your production system, right? And you might want to have a test user on production, right, which is able to perform, checkout in your application, just to enable you to understand, is my checkout actually working for my users if you're an e-commerce shop, right? So there's nothing we can do for you.
And this is kind of synthetic, right? And you normally also mark those transactions as synthetic, right? You will give a certain tag or HTTP header to the transaction so that somebody can detect that this is actually a synthetic transaction. Are these, just out of curiosity, if I'm using something like PayPal or some other service in the background, I want to test if they are working or not, do these APIs today support synthetic checks? So do they allow me to basically say, hey, now I'm calling you, but I actually not want to pay. I'm just testing if this payment service is working, right? So Stripe or whatever. Is that possible?
Some APIs do, others not, right? So you might want to, so if your system does support that, then you might want to do, a real transaction. But what we see customers doing is kind of, going until the end of the flow sometimes, and not doing the actual checkout, right? So not doing the actual transaction, or have a little, feature flag somewhere to, enable a synthetic transaction to pass, right? So yes, there's some complexity involved, acting right like a real user, right?
But as far as I know, I haven't used Checkly myself, but I know from my developers that it's super easy to set up. That's why they love it, right? It also works in their existing environment. So they somehow love it because Playwright and all these things seem to be familiar with them. Yesterday, I could pull up my Slack, but I know yesterday there was a deployment at Dash Zero and something didn't work. And they had to roll back that deployment. And the next comment was, I made some checkly tests. So next time this happens, we get informed that we did this, right? So it's kind of also this philosophy that, hey, with Checkly, I can actually test if something is working or not. And I have to create it. And it seemed to be like a very natural thing that the developer said, hey, this was not good. And to make sure that it doesn't happen, I create these 3 synthetic tests that made sure that, I don't know, I remember some ClickHouse thing is up and running and they did this with Checkly, right? So it's pretty cool service. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, it's interesting, right? So naturally you would say, hey, something like Checkly synthetic monitoring might be, testing your UI, right? So, but in the end, what it does is kind of running end-to-end tests, right? So, on production. So, even if you mess up your ClickHouse, which is maybe several layers below, you're able to catch it, right? And, what you're catching is a real problem for an end user, right? Compared to, various other tests that you might set up, etc., or, looking at your ClickHouse telemetry, there might be alerts in there which are not really having an impact on the end user. Right. While when we fire, that's at least our thinking, then you have a real problem. Then you need to wake up your engineers in the middle of the night. Right.
And as far as I know, you have more than 1,000 customers, so we're not the only one. So congrats on that. How did you get to 1,000 customers? Is it a PLG motion? So do customers just log in? And you probably can't do an enterprise sales with 1,000 customers at this point of time, but that sounds like it's a tool people find and then just use.
Yeah, so we have pretty much a PLG motion, so product-led growth motion, right? So kind of layered on top, we have sales supporting you, right? If you're a larger customer, right? So you might be a startup, very innovative team like Dash Zero, right? Then you might just create an account to Checkly, and then putting in a credit card and let it run. If you're an organization like LinkedIn, you might want to run a larger volume of synthetic checks and enable hundreds of engineers, right? And then we help you to onboard your teams, right? So we have almost 1,100 paying customers now. Lots of them are coming from a PLG motion, and others finding Checkly, are happy with Checkly, maybe with its side project, and then approaching us and approaching our sales team, and then we help them to get onboarded, right?
And is it normally, just out of curiosity, do they start with Playwright and then search for something that is basically supporting that, or do they start with Checkly and then get to Playwright? Can you see a pattern there? Is it like Playwright driving the customers to you, or the other way around?
We see both, right? So we do a lot of education around Playwright because we think it's a very cool framework, right? So and even if you aren't using Checkly today, we're gonna help you, getting started with Playwright. So there's a lot of content, and the YouTube channel where we have thousands of subscribers, etc. We want to enable your engineers kind of, to create Playwright scripts first, right? And then they might start think about, okay, can I catch that bug that we've rolled out yesterday? Can I catch that with a Playwright script running on Checkly? But we also see customers, coming to us saying, hey, we have downtimes, or we have, Datadog in place, but we didn't catch that. I don't have visibility into that problem from my end users, and the truth is my end users and customers are hammering my support, and I didn't, my support knew about the problem before I knew. So I want to have some visibility from an end user perspective, and this is also how customers are finding us, right? So these pretty much these two ways, right? So either you have the additional or initial adoption of Playwright and think about, okay, what else can I do with it? Or you really think about it from a pain perspective. So, we have downtimes. We want to be faster at detecting problems. We want to resolve problems faster. and to resolve these problems, we need to detect them first, right? So, and this is how customers come to us.
I can see that, yeah. Because, I mean, what you just said, you mentioned Datadog as an example, right? Most of the observability players, they also have synthetics, right? But what you're saying is basically that they are not specialized in synthetics and they can't do some of the things you will now explain what Checkly does, what others can't do, that it's harder for them to find them, and they don't use Playwright, or what is, I don't really know, right, what Datadog is, for example, doing. But what's the difference? Why, if I'm a Datadog customer, why would I mean, we all know that it's super expensive. That's one of the things probably. But beside the price, because I kind of think price is never a really good argument. I mean, at some point. So probably you also can do something that others can't do. So what is your pitch to say, hey, use Checkly instead of Datadog synthetics, right?
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned one reason, right? So it's price, but I agree with you, right? So it's never the only argument. You might think about, hey, how do I enable my engineers to reuse their tests, right? How do I enable them to have some insights into operations, right? So you could call that developer-owned operations. We have customers who came to us saying, hey, we need a synthetic monitoring which fits into our modern DevOps approach, right? So coming from Datadog or coming from Pingdom or other such services, right? So, and what we do differently is we enable you to take your existing tests, keep them in the code repository, and then use a subset of these tests to run on Checkly, right? So we have a CLI, we have a Terraform provider that enables you pretty much, with 2 or 3 commands to use a subset of these tests and run them against a production system, right? So you can stay in your IDE. We're not asking you to do, click ops, go into a UI somewhere and, write automation where clicks somewhere that you then don't understand, why it actually fires, right? So the thinking behind is, you as an engineer get alerted in the middle of the night, 3 a.m. How do we make sure that you really understand why that alert fires, right? The first thing is, if you were responsible or your team was responsible to create the actual monitors, then you're much more likely to understand, okay, this fires because of a reason. And as said, we're doing monitoring as code. It's in the end, just using your existing test scripts compared to legacy providers that force you into UI, into a tool where you might not even have access to, right? As a development team, so might be traditional APM tools where only operations people had access to, etc. So now you can use these test scripts, but it goes even further, right? So we call it monitoring as code because we enable you to configure pretty much everything as code, right? So is it status pages, dashboards on Checkly? Is it alert channels, etc.? So the whole stack you can have in the code repository. There's code versioning behind it, etc. And what it does, it kind of makes monitoring and observability kind of a team sport, right? So because you use your existing processes, etc., to configure your monitoring tool in the end, right? And you can also roll back.
I think where we are super aligned also with DashZero is exactly that we think, you should use the tools that developers are already using, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't reinvent the wheel. So if there's something like Playwright, or for example, we use Perseus for dashboards, or PromQL for query language, and defining alerts like Prometheus alerts, right? That are already there. And we also agree that it should be possible to version the dashboards, the alerts, or in your case, the test scripts with your code inside your tool set, like in GitHub, and then deploy them with your code. Because not only that it's aligned with your processes, what I really like about it is, so you are rolling back, like what we did this night, right? When something didn't work, you're rolling back. And then you actually make sure that the dashboards, the alerts that were there with that version of the code are also deployed again, right? If you do this ClickOps, right? Now I have created in my UI a new dashboards and something, rolling back the code. Now it doesn't work anymore, right? But because maybe with the old version of the code, there's a metric not available, or the alert doesn't work anymore. So in this case, you have everything versioned and running in one kind of bucket, which is what developers actually care about, is the code, right? The repositories.
Same with monitors, right? So if you're testing an API, developing a new API endpoint, you might create a monitor. You should create a monitor for it, right? So just to make sure that the API endpoint is up and running and, is kind of delivering the data that it should. Monitor is a check, right? So monitor is a check, is a test, right? So, and then, that check might need to change again, right? So if you roll back, the API endpoint is not there anymore, right? If you don't roll the test back or the check back, then you're going to alert engineers, right? So you don't want to have that happen. So it needs to be integrated in your software development lifecycle. So and I see we're all agreeing there, right?
I talk almost in every podcast. We were talking about shift left, which is kind of also scary, because it means everyone who is talking in this industry is talking about shift left, which means we put more and more stuff towards developer, right? Hey, here's your monitoring, security, testing thing, right? This sounds good and bad at the same time, but I totally get why it's needed, because the developer actually controls the code and is also in control of the testing, of the configuration. And I think with AI, I've seen a few things like that you can support now, developers creating those things easier. I'm not sure how your AI story is, if you have one, and if you see things happening that you use LLMs to create test cases, etc., or Playwright scripts. But I think in the future, I can definitely see that, right? That you create code and you, for example, say, hey, adopt the Playwright test to this new code, and it will support you 80% of the stuff that you normally would do, right? And that's probably something that will happen pretty soon.
Totally, right? So, the benefit of monitoring as code is, it's in your code repository, it's Playwright, so your co-pilot knows how to create Playwright scripts, right? So, and your co-pilot might in the future also know how to create, Checkly API tests. We are more thinking about integrating into existing, code generators for developers than, coming up with our own code generator. What Shift Left is doing, it's pretty much just, for me, it's just, automation, right? So thinking about, okay, how can I automate a process which was before, a manual process, using that word again, ClickOps, right? And how can I enable, we're saying developers, but I think what most of the industry means is engineers, right? So also SREs, operations, etc., who know how to code, how to enable them to automate, certain aspects, right? So, and I think that's an important movement, I believe, right? So, and traditionally that wasn't really automated and should be automated, right? So, yeah.
Oh, I agree. By the way, one of the reasons why we also have chosen some of the open standards, right, PromQL for querying, is also that we think if the future relies on LLMs and AI, and I think that's the same for Playwright, something that's well documented all over the net, where you have hundreds of things also documented on Stack Overflow, etc., and there is public documentation. That means that these LLMs can also learn about it, right? And then will be much better in doing it. If you have a proprietary test script, it will be much harder for something to really get that knowledge from public documentation and what's available, right? So that's something I think is a big advantage for publicly documented things, because just there's so much available.
Yeah, interesting, right? In a way, AI is like a developer, right? So developers are pushing back if there's technology used that they can't find on the internet, right? So and then now we're having the same conversation about why we're using this technology to enable AI, right? So I think well documented open standards are mandatory, right? And AI will just push that even further. We should use open standards, right? So also, standards like open telemetry, etc. So we're proprietary technology, is a thing of the past, right?
Yeah, talking about open telemetry and tracing, I saw recently an announcement that you started moving into that space. Tell me about it. What is the thing you're doing there?
So the high level thinking here is, Mirko, I wake you up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m., right? I tell you something is wrong, and if that problem is coming from your, UI or, something which is on the surface of your API, you might figure, you might understand that just from the alert, but there might be problems, with your ClickHouse that you can't understand just because there's an alert coming from Checkly. So what I want to enable you as a user is, waking up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., and really, not only understanding there's a problem, but actually also where the problem is coming from, right? To resolve the problem faster. And, the thinking is, okay, what kind of telemetry do we need to correlate with synthetics that enables you to, find these issues, full stack pretty much, right? So, and what we did is we, partnered with, companies like CoverLogics, etc., to correlate our tracing or synthetics with their tracing, pretty much, right? So, and then we enable also customers that don't have an APM suite, right? So we talked about having 1,000 customers. Some of them, you would be surprised, don't have Datadogs, deployed or any other APM solution, right? So enable them to send us traces as well, so that we can correlate them within Checkly, right? So, but the thinking is really to enable you to understand, okay, Checkly surfaced a problem. Where's the problem actually coming from, right? And traces enable you to backend traces enable you to see deep into your stack, right? And really, for you to understand, this is the layer in my stack I need to look at, right? So this is databases, there's a slow database query or anything, right?
No, it makes sense. Yeah, totally. We call it context, right? If you have a problem, you want context, because the problem without context is then you have to create that context, which can be very complicated. If you are able with the tool to create all the context for me, in best case, that's kind of, and I don't think that anyone these days does it really well so far, is you have a problem and you get all the relevant data. Here are the metrics of that pod. Here is the log that's important for you. Here's the trace. If you will get all that data for your failed synthetic check, and maybe even get an explanation why it happened, that would be awesome, right? Yeah.
Maybe even, help you to understand that a certain commit did affect the problem, etc., right? So that's not possible today at Checkly, but that's what we're thinking about, right? So how can we help you to understand, hey, certain action led to the situation you're in now?
It's hard, right? There's a lot of tools that claim that they can do it, but I did this too, right, in the past. But it is very hard, right? Because the other problem you always have is these false positives, right? What you also don't want to do is wake somebody up 3 a.m. in the morning, right? And present them with some data that makes absolutely no sense, right? Then they will say, oh my God, Checkly woke me up. They gave me these traces, told me it's ClickHouse, but it actually was not. And even if you are, this is my learning from Instana times, is like, even if you are 98% correct, but then the 2%, right? It's a little bit like autonomous driving, right? If you are 99% correct, but the 1% means you're driving into a wall, right? Nobody will accept that. And it's very similar in this observability environment, right? People will not accept you telling them false data, right? That's kind of the big problem, right? That you have to be accurate if you wake somebody up at 3 a.m.
That's a huge problem, right? And it's a problem that was also there in testing, right? So you don't want to, prevent your app from rolling out just because, there were false positives executing your tests, right? So that's a problem you need to work on, and we're working on every day, right? So we're monitoring our own systems quite heavily to make sure that our test execution runs well, right? So because we're executing like hundreds of millions of these test scripts, every day. Of course, we don't want to cause you waking up in the middle of the night because there was a problem with a test execution, right?
I agree.
So it's a really hard problem even harder if you then try to make sense of traces and logs, correlate synthetics with logs, and then not only taking the clear signal from a test and a test failed, but the test may be passed, but you see certain errors coming from your database. Are you alerting someone because of that?
I like what you're doing in tracing. I would have a lot of more questions, but I'm super happy that we have a really good observability vendor out of Germany, right? With Checkly, somebody who has more than 1,000 customers internationally, raised a $20 million round recently, right? On top of the round you had before. So congrats on that. I'm not only as an angel investor, I'm cheering for you that you are successful, and I'm only watching because I think you have some very interesting, innovative approaches, very open, very focused on automation on developers. I love that. So Hannes, thank you for joining my podcast.
Thank you, Mirko. It was great to be here, and let's catch up soon, right?
Thanks for listening. I'm always sharing new insights and insider knowledge about observability on LinkedIn. You can follow me there for more. The podcast is produced by DashZero. We make observability easy for every developer.